Week 1 is finally in the books. We had a 5-day wide week 1. Now it's time to move on to week 2. We talked before the break about schools that are sort of separating church and state with how they do their player acquisition strategy, and both in the portal and in high school. One school that is going to factor into this week's mix with high-level college football games, Oklahoma. Oklahoma plays Michigan. Bryce Underwood comes to town in Norman, and they did similarly to what Chris was talking about earlier with North Carolina when they hired Jim Nagy. Jim Nagy is the new GM at Oklahoma. I guess he's not so new anymore, but he's the GM at Oklahoma. And it's a situation where, as I understand it, they were doing that, kind of separating church and state, taking some of the player acquisition stuff off of Brent Venables' plate and making him more of a football coach with a capital F. Personally, I can't wait to see what Brent and Oklahoma's defense is going to have for Bryce Underwood. I was impressed with Bryce Underwood on Saturday night. Did some nice things in that initial game against New Mexico from what I saw. But now it's going to ratchet up, Matt. Oklahoma is a different kettle of fish.
100%. Now, I would say the biggest challenge for Michigan isn't going to be as much Oklahoma's defense as much as it'll be speaking of North Carolina, to go back to that, a quarterback that they wanted, and the offense and supporting cast that he has around him with John Mateer. So John is somebody who obviously did great things last year at Washington State, was one of the more notable transfer portal pickups this offseason. And that's going to be a challenge for that Michigan defense to go along with Oklahoma having Deion Burks, who's extremely talented and a future NFL player, Isaiah Satania, that Oklahoma and that staff really high on, Jaden Knott, running back from Cal, who's obviously done good things throughout the course of his career, who I think Oklahoma is expecting for him to be able to see more action compared to this past weekend when he only had one carry.
Yeah, Matt, do you know what's going on there?
Well, he was banged up during the course of fall camp, and just process for him in terms of working back. But it seems like the expectation is for him to be more involved than he was this past weekend. But with Bryce, I completely agree with you. Bryce, like obviously anytime that you're dealing with somebody that just turned 18 years old, regardless of how talented there are going to be growing pains. And it's not like he was perfect this past weekend in his first career start, and you wouldn't expect him to be, but you saw some plays in there. You saw some characteristics that are not standard and that help you understand why he was as highly ranked as what he was. And also just frankly, why Michigan's as high on him and excited about him is what they are, to go along with the fact that they have some pieces around him, like Alabama transfer Justice Haynes at running back, that lead to them feeling like they're capable of doing some good things, not only moving forward into the future, but this season.
I will say, I think with Bryce Underwood, one thing you saw on Saturday in his debut as a starter is the fact he played more than 50 games of high school football. And that's something I've had multiple people bring up with me this week and just in general about Bryce Underwood. Like, yes, he's a true freshman, but this is one of the more mature and more proven players to come into college football at that position in a very long time. And there's a reason why those around Michigan have been so bullish around him this offseason. It started as soon as he got there in January and February, through the spring and then the summer. Like, people talked about him as somebody ready to handle all that comes with being quarterback at Michigan. Not only like that media and the press and the attention, but like leading for your teammates. And I think you saw that manifest on the field. You saw it in his decision-making. Like, he did not put the ball in danger. You saw in the way he handled himself. I'm going to disagree a little bit with Matt. I do kind of agree to the point, like John Mateer and that offense are going to be a potential problems for Michigan's defense. But I think Brent Venables as a play caller going up against a true freshman is going to be a very interesting watch on Saturday. Like, Brent Venables is one of the more creative play callers in the country at creating pressure and generating pressure. And I think that's going to be a real test for a true freshman and an offensive line that had a lot of turnover. And that Oklahoma defense, like, I know they had some turnover this offseason, but they are really good. They've put that group in a position where they're going to have one of the better secondaries in the SEC. They have a very good defensive line led by R. Mason Thomas, a guy who I know Matt knows is going to be a draft pick here sooner rather than later. And that is a group that if you heat Bryce Underwood up, like, I'm curious what that looks like. And also, like, Michigan did not run Bryce Underwood at all on Saturday. And like, Bryce Underwood is somebody who can move if it comes down to it. So I'm very curious if we see that part of Bryce Underwood's game kind of debut on Saturday against Oklahoma.
I could have worded that better. I wasn't saying that Oklahoma's defense, especially led by Brent Venables, wasn't going to be an issue for Michigan.
No, I get it, Matt. You're just saying like you're not worried about Oklahoma's defense at all. Like
the point that was trying to make is they view the offense led by John Mateer and guys like Deion Burks as the bigger challenge for Michigan, even more so than the defense, even though those are completely fair points on your end, especially when you have a unit that's run by somebody like Brent Venables.
I think they're going to have to do some design run for Bryce Underwood in this game. I can understand why they didn't use it against New Mexico. Didn't have to win, obviously. But I think it gives you a different dimension. Obviously, also of note, Michigan's defense, Rayshon Barham out for the first half. The linebacker is suspended for targeting. They were not able to get that overturned by appeal. I think Justice Haynes also is going to be massive for Michigan in this game. He was tremendous on Saturday, $159 on the ground against New Mexico.
Yeah, the Rayshon Barham first half suspension is something that's really unfortunate for Michigan. So it got called for a questionable targeting penalty during the course of the second half of that game against New Mexico. And that's one of the better players for Michigan on defense. So a tough blow for them to have to be without him for the first two quarters.
And I do agree with you, Richard. I think Justice Haynes, like sneakily, was one of the most important additions of the offseason. Like Michigan beat out South Carolina for Justice Haynes in a pretty heated recruiting battle. And you saw on Saturday just what he can do. He had that 59-yard touchdown run. I know it was against New Mexico, but you saw how he separated from people in the open field. And if you can break off a big play on Saturday with Justice Haynes, it makes things a lot easier on your offense and Bryce Underwood against that defense. Keep him honest and also create some explosives outside of the passing game.
Well, the team that he was on last year, Justice Haynes, Alabama, could certainly have used him. You know, I know obviously they have Jam Miller who ended up being hurt, but for me, like if you're Alabama, how does Justice Haynes get out of the building? I mean, you shackle him to the radiator for all intents and purposes. Like that's a great player.
It's expensive to keep multiple players in your running back room at this point in college football. And I know this is not an Alabama discussion, but it is worth mentioning. Like we think of Alabama as like this significant power nationally in NIL, and they're not like among the top teams in the country in terms of NIL spending and like keeping people intact. And I think that matters.
They're about to be. I got a feeling they're about to be in December.
Well, I think it's John Talty would tell you this, like there's only one billionaire in the state of Alabama and he's an Auburn booster. So you wonder what that looks like, but we'll see this offseason.
This is a gut check game for a team that a lot of people think can be a college football playoff dark horse and a dark horse in the Big Ten race. I think some of that comes from the fact that Illinois obviously was hot coming down the stretch last season, brings back a decent amount of the roster last year, and comes into this season with a schedule that is pretty light. It's not Indiana light like Indiana's was last year, but it's still pretty light. It ain't like this week because this Duke team can beat them, absolutely. But there's a quarterback matchup, a quarterback dichotomy here that I think is really interesting. Chris, you did some reporting on this. Luke Altmyer coming back to Illinois when obviously there were many schools that took their shot at him. And it's Luke Altmyer kind of has a throwback nature to him. And there's an amount of loyalty there that I think is really interesting. But you juxtapose that against Darian Mensah. And I'm not saying Darian Mensah is a mercenary or not loyal or whatever, but Darian Mensah is one of the most highly compensated players in the portal last year. So it's just an interesting dichotomy that these two quarterbacks come into this game with.
Yeah, well, first loyalty on Duke's side too, because like Malik Murphy won a lot of games for them, and they were happy to move on to Darian Mensah for $4 million a year. But on the Luke Altmyer front, yeah, there were a lot of teams I think would have been very happy to have Luke Altmyer as their QB1 this year and kick the tires in the portal. I know the Tennessee stuff in the spring got a lot of attention for a lot of quarterbacks, but there were a lot of teams trying on Luke Altmyer in the winter as well. He would have been a very popular guy had he chosen to go in the portal. But he did show a lot of loyalty to that program. And I know John Talty wrote a story on Luke Altmyer this offseason before, talked about his priorities. Like one of them was that the coaching staff would remain static. And there was a couple other priorities for him. But like this is a guy And loyalty is also just a fun word for him too, because if we remember, Luke Altmyer started his career at Ole Miss and essentially lost the job to Jackson Dart back in the day. But he has been at Illinois for such a long time that he is now the loyal person in the face of that program. But he is a really talented passer. I think he's somebody, if Illinois is going to make a run to the college football playoff this year, like a lot of people think, he is going to emerge as one of the top quarterbacks in college football. And I think he has that capability. Probably doesn't have like the high level, like NFL upside that some of the other quarterbacks do that we talk about from week to week, but he is a potentially draftable player. And he is somebody that a lot of teams would have been happy to have on their roster.
And he is surrounded by some players that are next level players. So there are at least a few that immediately come to mind that NFL people view as being draftable guys heading into next year. So you look at Illinois, 10 wins last season, bring back some key players from that group. It was unfortunate from their standpoint to lose running back who ended up at Georgia, who was a productive player for them last year. But at the same time, this is going to be a test. So Darian Mensah got a lot of attention this offseason. Not only the move that he made to Duke, but the financial part of it that went along with that. And at least through the first game, and granted it was against an FCS opponent, that there was return on investment there where you saw just some flashes from Darian Mensah that showed some of the talent that he has, where he finished 27 of 35 or whatever it was for close to 400 yards. Obviously, this is going to be a tougher opponent for him compared to what that was this past weekend. But at the same time, this is going to be a nice little test for an Illinois team that, like Chris touched on, that there's a lot of buzz about at this point.
5 returning starters in the Illinois secondary. That, I think, if we saw anything, like it's Elon, right? Like, you're not taking a ton away, but you can take away the philosophical approach for that offense, and they let Darian Mensah chuck it. So if you're going into Saturday and you're looking for a key to that game, it's how Illinois secondary holds up against Darian Mensah, because they are clearly going to lean on the guy that they paid a lot of money to this offseason. And
it's not just Darian Mensah either. So a couple other names from Duke's standpoint, just worth keeping an eye on that are known guys on a national level. Actually, one specifically. So one of the key pieces for him in terms of who he's throwing the ball to, Andrew Anthony, people probably remember him from Michigan back in the day, was most recently at Oklahoma, dealt with some injuries there. Hey, he's actually now at Duke with Darian Mensah, had a touchdown catch this past weekend. There's some other pieces that they added from a receiver standpoint to go along with that just during the course of this past offseason. But there is some talent there within that receiver group and pieces that Darian Mensah has around him. So it's not just him for Duke in terms of giving them a chance to go out and be competitive in this game.
And on the other side of the ball, like to Matt's point, they have a lot of players. Chandler Rivers is one of the best cornerbacks in college football, and I'm sure Luke Altmyer will not be eager to throw his way, given that secondary. So that'll be interesting to watch.